Splines are useful for creating some more complex curves. So let's take a look at this design, for example. And I might notice that this shape is a somewhat complex shape, and I might not be able to create it by just using lines and arcs. So that guitar shape was created by this base sketch here, and you can see right here I have a fairly complex curved shape here. And I couldn't create this curve with just regular lines, arcs, or circles. So I created this complex curve using a spline. Now to create my splines in Shapr3D is a very simple process. I'll just go into my sketch tools, and right below my line tool I have a spline tool. Also notice within my spline tool I have two options here. I have a control spline or a fit spline, as well as just a setting for my pencil pressure, light or hard, and we'll see that in a second. We'll just keep the default to hard here, and I'll start with a fit spline. So to draw out my spline, I just draw a line like I would any other line, and now I press down with my pencil to create a spline point. And continuing to hold down my pencil here, again, I can now press again to add another spline point, continue my sketch, maybe press again, again, and again. So pressing down anywhere I would like this spline point. Now I can use these spline points to really help fine-tune my curve. So I can tap to select any spline point, and I can move that spline point around to fine-tune my spline or my curve. I can also tap to select this portion of my spline point as well to change specific angles of my spline and really just get the exact shape I might want. So I have a whole bunch of options I can move around and play around with to really just fine-tune my complex curve here. And maybe I'll move this in a little bit and something like this. What's also useful to note is that I can select multiple spline points at once and move around two spline points at the same time if I'd like. And now here we can see we've created that fairly complex curve that perhaps I could start to design the body of my guitar from. Now I'll just delete this spline and do the exact same thing, but this time taking a look at my control spline. So here again I'll start out my sketch, press to add my spline point, maybe add one here, maybe here, here, and so on. And now I have my control spline points instead of my fit spline points. It's the exact same kind of idea, but notice my spline points are not directly on my line, but are slightly off my line here. Again, I can control any of these spline points as I see fit to get the general complex shape I may want. Control splines can be useful to add tangencies to lines, for example. So let's say I just had a horizontal line like this, and I want the top portion of my spline there to be perhaps tangent with this. I could move my spline point to be on that same line there. And now notice that my horizontal line comes into my starting of my spline here, and those are now tangent with each other. Again, I'll just delete my spline and my line here. Finally, it's just useful to note that I can also create closed out splines. So I'll create one more spline here, and just the same way, press on each of the spline points as I may need. And if I just hover over back to my original spline point, notice that that has now created a closed out spline. So a fully closed shape. Aside from that, everything else works the same. I still have my control points that I can move around as needed to customize my shape or design.